MEGATRENDS Newsroom looks at population decline in Western Europe and the emerging Mideast refugee crisis with Dr. Susan Yoshihara. Dr. Susan Yoshihara is founder and president of the American Council on Women, Peace, and Security and serves on the board of the White House Fellows Alumni Association and Foundation. She's a U.S. Naval Academy graduate and served on the faculty of the U.S. Naval War College. She's been involved in negotiations at the United Nations since 2006, regularly advises members of Congress, the administration, and UN diplomats. She served on the Holy See delegation to the UN Commission on Population Development, and she's the author of the book, Waging War to Make Peace, U.S. Intervention in Global Conflicts, and co-editor of Population Decline and the Remaking of Great Power Politics. She's working on her next book, stories about her experience as a U.S. Navy combat logistics and search and rescue helicopter pilot in the Pacific Theater. Well, good morning, Dr. Yoshihara.
Good morning.
I wanted to ask you, you wrote a book entitled Population Decline and the Remaking of Great Power Politics, which of course brings to mind the question, how serious is population decline in the Western world currently?
For a generation, experts have told us that population increase is making the world less secure and more unstable, more prone to war and fighting. But what we know now is that the opposite is true. Falling birth rates have led to an unprecedented crisis of global aging, and that's made our world more unstable and insecure. And yet, despite the evidence, the United States and its allies in Europe continue to pour billions of dollars every year into pushing down birth rates. Environmentalists who have done some great work giving us a cause to protect and preserve our creation have also sadly restarted their old campaign against the human person, as though there are too many babies on Earth. And again, this cannot go on. It's not sustainable. And if things continue, we'll see frightening trends in places like Russia and China, and their behaviors, their obstreperous behavior will increase. And then across the pond, our allies in Europe and in Japan will be unable to keep the peace and protect our sea lanes and our borders, and things could get worse. So there's probably no better time than now to start to think about the strategic consequences of global population decline.
Yeah. You've stated before that population decline can destabilize countries and lead to military conflict. What countries most come to mind when you hear that scenario?
Think of the world in two groups of countries. You've got those groups that want to change the world order, and mostly those are Russia and China. And then you've got those groups who built the world order as we know it, the United States and their allies after World War II. And let's start with the ones who want to change it, those who want to revise. We call them the revisionist states, China and Russia. Well, look at China first. China has seen, it's about to be overtaken as the world's most populous country. It has seen a decline starting as early as 2010 or 2013, according to its government statistics, a contraction of 3 million workers a year. That's a huge decrease in the number of workers. And its most recent report, official Chinese report, is calling its demographic demise a crisis. So finally, Beijing is really recognizing that this is a security crisis. Now, what does that have to do with security? Well, what we identify in our book, Population Decline and the Remaking of Great Power Politics, is what we see in China is the crisis of closing windows. The closing windows of opportunity to take care of big security issues. Think Tibet, think Taiwan. Think about them building these islands and then weaponizing these islands against American aircraft carriers. Think about these island disputes that have gone on with their neighbors like Japan and the Philippines and the others, and how they're accelerating these. In other words, we are going to be living through, it's already started, but the next 20 years are going to be far more unstable in the Pacific because of China's precipitous population decline. Now, not only is China shrinking in its workforce, but it has two other big problems. And one of them is an explosion of uneducated, impoverished elderly without a social safety net. This is really poises China for a humanitarian crisis. And as you've seen, they've tried to restart the tradition of honoring families. For example, a few years ago, they changed their one child per family policy to a two child per family policy. And what did couples do? They responded by having even fewer children. So Beijing has not been able to increase population on demand. 2,500 years of Chinese history of honoring the family has changed. The light has gone out. It seems they can't relight that at will. And what you're seeing now is they've had to pass laws to protect the elderly from their children, not just from neglect, but then subsequent laws to protect the elderly from abuse. This, at the same time, we're relying on those elderly to take care of what children they have while the couples go into the cities for work. It's really an extreme situation. And then the second problem, and that is the skewed population toward men. We have known for some time.
How bad is it, Doctor?
Yeah.
How big is the disparity? Can you give us an idea of that? How big this disparity is in China?
Between the men and the women?
Yeah, like in terms of numbers out of 100 people.
Yeah, so it could be as high as 100 million, what they call missing women, killed because of sex-selective abortion and infanticide. And of course, this has been going on not just in the last 40 years, but it's been going on historically, and not just China, but also in India and other countries. But in China, it's extreme because it leaves you with millions of family-aged men who will never be able to find a bride and never be able to start a family. That, in turn, some people have tied to a more unstable society internally to China. Now, that hasn't been proved to be an external threat. However, you do see the problem of human trafficking on the borders with North Korea, Vietnam, and others due to this shortage in brides, bride buying, bride sharing, that sort of thing.
Right. And so you have basically a situation where if you have 100 randomly chosen Chinese, you might have 40 women and 60 men.
Yes, well, so it's extreme in some places. The normal ratio of boys to girls at birth is about 105 boys to 100 girls. And why there's excess boys, some say it's because boys are, fall out of trees, have a higher mortality rate before the age of 5, for whatever reasons, girls live longer. And that has kept our global population pretty stable over recorded history. And in China, it's extreme in some areas, 120 boys, 130 boys per 100 girls. Especially in places like Shanghai, where you see it's skewed far toward males. So again, these tend not to be reversible, at least in the short term. I know that's a big question on everyone's mind. Well, how do we protect women's rights? How do we let the Chinese know that girls are valuable? Believe me, if Beijing could reverse it, they would have done it. But what's happened in China is that their family planning policy, and I think it's important to remember that it's family planning. This is not a policy of killing people. This is a policy of just family planning like we have in the West. And that is to have fewer children per family. And that is what has been proved so deadly for girls, because if you're a second child as a girl, you have a 50% chance of death. And if you're a third child and you're a girl, you had a 75% chance of being killed at birth. So it is the decline in family size which has been driving the feticide.